make this feel a little bit more like a community, so that we're not doing to each other what our students did to us for so long. Thank you, Kate. Chris, good to see you. So just a brief little introduction of what it is that this is about. Is this assessment series started last year from the fall conference, and we kind of kept going with a session approximately every month. And we've decided that we're going to keep that going through this year. So there's a session this month. There will not be a session in October because we have the Northwest Math Conference. And there'll be lots of good sessions at that. And then we'll start up again in November. We're starting this session with just having some whole group sharing of where we are in our assessment journey. If there's something we've heard at this session or elsewhere that we're trying in our classroom and how that is going. And I want to remind everybody that the last session we had was with Ann Arden from Ottawa, but at the beginning of that session, we did sort of a share out, and Richard shared something that a lot of people became really interested in. And that's why we're having Richard here doing a more formal presentation, so more of us can hear in greater detail about what it is that he's doing. But in the meantime, tell us what's going on in your assessment practice. What are you playing with? Where are you in your journey? Is there something that you picked up from one of the sessions last year that you're trying, and how's that going for you?
I could share something.
Oh, great, Julia, thanks.
So I'm a new teacher. I've only been teaching for a year and a half. So something that I've started doing this fall is I'm keeping better daily records of my kids' learnings. So I have a table with all my intentions for the unit at the top, and then as they are achieving them, I'm just tracking a date next to the name, and I'm being more intentional about taking pictures that I'm not necessarily going to put on fresh grade, but as they're learning, so that after school I can just quickly go like, okay, I see your work, they've got it, they haven't, and then I can just delete that when I'm done. So that's making my assessment more obvious to me and clear. Yeah. And
are you feeling anything different when you're doing that?
Feeling anything? I feel like I'm doing my job better, but that's about it.
That's I don't think there's any better feeling than that as a teacher. I just want to draw attention to something that you highlighted there, and I think it's a really important distinction, which is the distinction between the capturing of the data and the recording of the data. And a lot of teachers are overwhelmed by trying to collapse those two things together. And it sounds like what you're doing, which I highly recommend, is that you can capture the data and then you can take a moment at the end of the day to record the data. And because trying to do them both at the same time can be overwhelming when you're in the middle of everything that's going on and you're trying to do that. Mm-hmm. So that you're finding that manageable for yourself.
Yes, so far at least.
Awesome. What grade do you teach?
I'm doing 1-2.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. Anybody else want to add on to that? What Julia talked about, or something else?
We have a new competency spreadsheet to collect all our grades. So we're in high school, so I'm pre-calculus 11. So that new spreadsheet, and we're using it right across the department, and actually right across the whole school. It's just been developed. So that spreadsheet has become really useful to remind us all the competencies to be making sure we're recording and marking and how to mark it. We've gone through it with our students to explain how it works as well. So that's where we're at.
Awesome. And how's the conversations among your colleagues going around that? That must have been really rich.
Each department got to contribute what they wanted to be in that spreadsheet. So they are the same, but there's some little quirks that the English department, social studies want a slightly different. Within the math department, we knew what we wanted to see. We had tried it, we kind of pre-tried it last year, just within the math department. Now it's the whole school, it's mandatory amongst the entire school that we're all on this common competency mark spreadsheet that we all use.
That's a really rational way to approach this. And I've worked with other teachers who have said this too, that it feels like there's so much redundancy between the curricula around the competencies that you don't feel like you need to address all the competencies and all the subjects, that you can spread them out.
Yeah.
Nice.
So far, we'll see how it goes, but so far it seems pretty good.
What district are you working in?
I'm at Brentwood College.
Okay,
So yeah, independent school in Vancouver
nice.
Island. Yeah.
All right, wonderful. Anybody else?
I teach grade 8s and 9s, and I teach them math and science. And I have started doing the assignments in such a way that I first list out the competencies that we are going to be covering in that particular assignment, so that the students become aware of which competency they are going to be doing. And I think the students are becoming more aware than us, because as teachers, we know which ones we'll be doing. Now the students are becoming more aware of what they are doing and why that grade is, why they're getting that particular grade. And I do attach the rubric as often as I can when it is a project-based one.
Oh, nice. So there's been 2 talks about competencies. Now, have either of you figured out how you're going to merge the competencies or not merge it for the report card?
Yeah, we've got a base. Actually, when we put in the scores, it generates the percentage grade, because we need to present the percentages for grades 10, 11, 12. So it does generate a percentage. And again, we've explained that, how that works to the students, whether they're extending, whether they're proficient in that area. So as we put in the grades, proficient, high, low, extending, it will then churn out, the spreadsheet does churn out a grade that we have to then report to the ministry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And is that combined with the content grade, or are they kept separate?
It can be content as well. It is content as well. It's all in one.
Okay.
Then we can change the percentages, what we want each one, what percentage goes towards the final grade.
Yeah.
So as a math department, we've decided on the common percentages. Again, it's up to the different departments, but within the math department, we had a discussion on what we want to keep that as. Also, depending on whether it's pre-calc 11 or foundations of math 12, we can make some adjustments depending on that course.
I think this is probably one of the most contemporary discussion points right now, which is how to, or whether to, merge contents and content, and what to do with these things. And it's nice to see that people are having ideas around that.
I can jump in as well. I've been using standards-based grading for quite a while, and the math department for grade 8 and 9 have had about 15 standards. The first 4 being competency standards, and then a bunch of content standards after that. And this year we are going to track all the standards, but the grades will be determined only off the first 4 standards, which are the competencies. I did quite a bit of data crunching to see off of all the past years of using both content and competency, how far off I would be, and it is basically 0. So although I'm tracking everything, their grades are only determined off the competencies for grade 8 and 9. And look, we only have to give a letter grade anyway. So you have a big range of percentages if you miss, as it were. So, so that's one thing. Number 2, we have a real school focus on feedback rather than grades right now. And I teach at a private university prep school. So you can imagine there is quite a focus, or traditionally has been quite a focus, on the grades. So I have actually an assessment I'm giving back first block tomorrow morning that will have no grades on it. I have graded it. I have recorded those grades in our online spreadsheet, kind of like Kate was talking about. We have an online spreadsheet, but we are making a school-wide concerted effort to give back assessments, talk about them, not in terms of grade, but in terms of individual feedback. I do a lot of questions back to the kids rather than solving the problems for them. And then we'll go through any questions that they have, and then I can release the questions or the levels that I have given them, even after I'm actually intending on having them self-score so that they can compare where they think they are to where I think they are against the 10 or so standards in the course eventually.
Nice. And when you have that, and if a student can actually come up with what they think they deserve and have that conversation with you, that means never mind what the grade is, you are doing something right in order for a student to be informed enough that they can have that conversation with you. And yeah, there's just so many things that are good about that. It feeds into this discourse around the grade being a byproduct of a larger process, as opposed to the grade being the objective of the process. So the process is the objective is feedback, the grade is a byproduct of that. And yeah, I've advocated for a long time that aggregation, the crunching of data, should only happen at reporting time as necessary. But other than that, it should live as information.
Yeah, and thank you for that, because I found that really helpful, and I've moved more and more away from crunching the numbers to get the grade and more to having a conversation with the student and using my experience and professional judgment to get the grade, which I know is problematic from I have to justify this perspective, but I've been doing this for 25 years. And so that helps me to be able to actually get away with that. And so I only give grades at report card time, which is twice for each class. And I always have a conversation with the student, which takes forever. And I find that hard to get the time, but it's worth it, I think. And I give feedback otherwise in terms of the competencies and how they're doing with the learning outcomes.
Nice. And all of this is going to, I think, segue really nicely into Richard's presentation. Before we go there, does anybody else have anything to add in their journey? So much good stuff here.
I saw Richard's question in the chat, so he was asking about the competencies. What I did, and I'm lucky I have whiteboards all around my room. I created magnets, a lot of them for all my math classes. And those are our competencies that we can literally stick next to a kid's question when we want to focus on which one of the 4 competencies. I just color coded them. I don't know if you can see them there, but I color coded all 4. I had them done up at a printer in Vancouver that specialized in magnetic little strips. Done. And it is fantastic for, again, focusing the kids, no matter if they're in grade 8 and that's what they're getting marked on this year or next year, or my AP Calc class, and I really want them to focus on the right notation. Boom, there's the communication standard or competency right next to the work. Nice.
So you throw that on as they're working or after they finish their work to refocus them on some aspect of the work?
Yeah, or sometimes kind of thinking classroom style, I'll see that they've got some great work, but usually their communication is the thing that's kind of holding them back. And I'll just toss a communication one next to them. And they know that's a quiet signal to think about labeling their axes or putting the right, limit notation up, or they just do kind of a double check. Or I'll throw the solving one up and they know that, oh, we better check our work or we might not have the right calculations that are shown.
Nice.
Like Phil, I've been doing standards-based grading for several years. And one thing we were kind of chatting about in our math department here last year, and something I'm going to try to do this year, is I still list all my content, or all my standards kind of content-based. So I mean, they're kind of, they look like they're content, but then I tag each standard with competency. I just track the grading in terms of the standard, but the idea is that maybe once a week or whatever, I'll get students to kind of reflect on how they're doing, and then sort of kind of do their own grouping of their competencies. So they'd have to kind of go through their portfolio and then kind of themselves, they would join together and say, okay, overall, my reflecting on communication's been pretty good, or but they would, the idea is for them to pull it out of the tags that are in their grade book. Yeah, so that way I'm not tracking we're not tracking a competency as a line item in the grade book, but they're reflecting on it. And I think like Phil, I got this idea from Phil too, is like for sure we will track a few competencies as a singular thing. But more general, I think they'll kind of just reflect on it based on the tags that we've given the standards.
Right, nice. Well, I think that's, thanks, Doug. I think this is a great segue to open up the floor to Richard. And welcome Richard DeMerchant, who's at St. Michael's over on Vancouver Island. And like I said, in the last session last year, Richard just dropped this little thought bomb into the discussion. And it had ripples that were felt around BC for a long time. And a lot of people were tapping into these ideas. So to spread that idea a little bit longer and further, we've invited Richard to share in more details. So Richard, we're looking forward to your presentation. Take it away.
Okay, hi everyone. I'll do my best with this. So I didn't plan breakout rooms or anything. So if you've got questions, feel free to pop them up. I'm not too sure how to show my chat, so I'll just do my best. But
hold on, Richard, just so everybody knows, after Richard's presentation, I will put you into breakout rooms to discuss what you heard with Richard. And when we come back, we'll do Q&A.
Perfect. That was planned all along, wasn't it, Peter?
Yes, it was.
Yeah, excellent. So I've called this no surprise assessment, and really the idea is really no surprises for the students, okay? Before we get going, I do want to acknowledge that here at St. Michael's University School, we rest on the heart of the Strait Salish territory, a living culture with its own rites, ceremonies, and unfolding history. And we honor the Esquimalt, Songhees, and Wasanich peoples whose homelands we share, and we recognize our neighbors. So we have an artist in residence, Dylan Thomas, and he's actually created these spindle whorls for us, which are really super cool. So I wanted to put them up. So we have a great advantage in order to actually have him be involved in some of our classes if we wish. So first of all, what do I mean by no surprise assessment? I boil it down into 3 points. Students know what they're learning. Students know what they're being assessed on. And then finally, students know the results of their assessment. I think they should know all 3. And that's really the goal with where this all started. We were using FreshGrade, and FreshGrade was good for collecting archives, but it wasn't always good for some of the other things that we wanted to do. And when the pandemic hit, we decided as a school to move away from FreshGrade for a variety of reasons. Most of them probably more related to pandemic and trying to just get by. So I looked at how I could create some spreadsheets to track things, and that's what Peter's asked me to talk about today. So the first step really is delineating the skills the students are learning so they actually know what they're doing. When you read through the current curriculum, you know, there's content and competencies, but where things fit within there's a lot of flexibility in terms of what teachers are going to do. So if you look at these couple pictures, they're right from the Thinking Classroom book that Peter's created, which really gives an idea of what we want students to be able to do if they are working with fractions, or what we want them to do if they are using repeating patterns. Having worked at the ministry, I saw those a lot as what were the achievement indicators a number of years ago. And if you've taught for a number of years, you probably recognize the achievement indicators. So within our school, what we started to look at was, how do we actually look at the learning standard? In our case, this would be what is on our report card. On the left side, the learning standard, and then the expectations we expect students to be able to do. I would say one flaw we have in the system that we're still trying to work on is, how do we get that in really student kid-friendly language? And that's one of our focuses this year. For some of it, it makes total sense. For some, not so much. So we're really trying to say, if you want to solve problems and communicate the solution effectively, then these are the expectations we would hope that you could do throughout the year. So this one's a bit more competency based. And then we also have some that are more content based where we've merged content and competency together. And we've done this at grade 8. So we wanted to create a two-way flow of information between the student and the teacher. So this is a screen capture from a student last year. This was early in the process. We're still refining. I don't think it's perfect, but in terms of the Pythagorean theorem, we have 4 different things we'd like the students to be able to do to show they're proficient. We have since changed those for this year, but I had this screen capture in last year, so I wanted to show you. So for this particular student, they've been proficient in their ability to model and explain the Pythagorean theorem, concretely, pictorially, or using technology. And I've just written a little note for the student. And this is the latest note. In some cases, I put an update in, and you'll notice that's on the right side. When writing out solutions does not have trouble and uses units to see it correctly. So for that student, that's where they are at the time. And that student would have access to that information that they are proficient or extending or developing or emerging. So we work on a 4-point rubric here as well. And the students constantly have access to this. I have not shared it with their parents. However, because it's on the web, I have told the parents that the students have access to this in hopes that parents will have the conversation with the students about maybe where they're having trouble or where they're really excelling or where they want to challenge themselves. So where does the actual information come from? The information comes from a few different places. One is classwork. So for this example, understands the relationships between squares and roots. We've actually pulled questions from the textbook and said some of these questions are basic, some of them are intermediate, and some of them are advanced. And if you've looked at the Thinking Classroom book, you'll recognize this chart as being somewhat similar to some, I don't know which chapter it is, chapter 13 maybe, out of the Thinking Classroom book. So those are basically practice. Those are the check your understanding questions we want students to try. Do we want them to try all of them? No, we want them to try enough that they know what they're doing. We've also added some things in here that aren't necessarily out of a textbook. For example, determining the square of a given number, we would expect students to be able to use mental math to determine the square up to 12 by 12. Beyond that, we're pretty explicit. You should know how to use your calculator and be able to do that. Same with roots. We also look at how we can do it in other ways. So for example, this picture was taken this afternoon. On the right, we had students actually go out and create squares that are 1 meter squared, 2 meters squared, 3 meters squared, and 4 meters squared. And the idea was really to get students to look at what a meter square is and to actually make some connections between what squares and square roots are. And for the majority of students, when they actually did the 2 meters squared, we would ask them, how long do you want to cut the string? Nobody had trouble with the 1 meter squared. They all asked for 4 meters of string to make the perimeter. However, when we got to the 2 meters squared, which is the second one there, the majority of students asked for 8 meters of string. So they obviously hadn't connected perimeter and area, and within their spreadsheet, we will then add those notes in there as something to keep an eye on. So along the way, we've also gathered information on previous skills they should have. Things even like measuring, like a lot of students in grade 8, you'd think they could use a meter stick, but they've just forgotten. So it's a good chance to do some timely reminders. So all of those ways are ways that we're trying to capture information and make it visible for the students. Students also do self-assessments. There's quizzes and tests that occur. So those still happen. In short, basically everything that happens with a student, we try to collect it. And as was mentioned before, I just kind of keep a piece of paper and I write notes and then I record the notes after. It's too hard to collect it any other way. Sometimes the notes are in pictures, sometimes they're in other ways. So there was a few students I actually took a picture of their shape that they did today and got to that part. Okay, so that's where the assessment comes from. And what does it actually look like? And I think this is the part that that people were curious about. So in the first version I shared last year, there were some holes with that version. There was a master sheet for assessment, and that master sheet linked to a student sheet, which I then recorded comments on, which meant I needed to keep a master sheet, which had all of the how a student was doing, emerging, developing, proficient, or extending, and then I would put the comments on an individual student sheet. It really got a little bit unwieldy trying to go back and forth. It was a better system than what we had before, and the students could see what they had, but it didn't work out the best. The data entry with those two sheets was a bit complicated, and when I shared this last year, I can't even remember who, I'm sorry, hopefully maybe that person's on here. They noted that there was actually a hack where you could actually see everyone's grade, which was like, oh no, that's not very good. So a suggestion came in how to fix that. So I've changed it a little bit now where there's a master sheet which has the assessment and the comments together, which makes data entry a lot easier. And then each student gets their individual sheet, which is shared only with them. They can share it with their parents or anyone else they want, but though then they can actually see their data. So along the way, we've kind of worked out these Google Sheets, if you like, which is just a way to record stuff. I like to think of it as it is a look for the student into my mind where I am thinking you are at. And if I'm not in the right place, you need to come and tell me. And we talk dialogue about that a lot with students so that things do change. Okay. You are welcome to use anything that I share with you. I will share the folder. If you make it better, the only thing I ask is let me know how you made it better, because the last time I shared it got a lot better after that. So, and if it's okay, I'll just go on and share. Does that work for everyone? Is there any questions up to this point, or it's easier if you see it? Okay, so I think I have to get out of that. So what, can everybody see like my Google Drive? Okay.
We're seeing it.
Perfect. So what I'll do is I will share this folder with you. I'll put it in the chat maybe in a second. The first set of tracking sheets is here. If you want to look at it, you're welcome to. And I actually created a little video which says how to set them up and do everything. In the second set of sheets, I did the same thing. It's a little bit, there are a lot more files with it, but I'll show you what it looks like. If you go into the file, there's a file called Read Me First. And if you read that first, there's a video that I've actually prepared on Loom that actually says how to set these up for your own classroom. So if you like it and you want to set it up, hopefully I've made it as easy as possible for you. What does it look like? So, whoops, sorry, I just got to get this so it's not in the way. So this is kind of what the master sheet looks like. So for me, I've set it up for my classes. So for a class I teach 803 math, I have an 804 math, I have an 803 science, I have an 804 science, and students have access to everything within their sheet. Okay. So looking back, still under communicates and solve the solution effectively, for student 803-1, I would just select where they are in the drop-down menu, and I could type in whatever I want within here. Okay. Now, obviously no one's named student 803-1. So to make it easier for people, what I've done is I've actually created a class list, and I just picked the 30 most common names in BC. If I select these names, and I mean, you can picture doing that, and you populate them in, sorry. Copy. And I paste them in. What it will do now in the sheet is for all the sheets, the way I've set them up, it'll put their names in. Okay. So for every student I can go across and I can add any comments I want for all 30 students. If you don't have 30, just don't use them all. I can put any comments. So identifies key information given when solving a problem. Let's say this student is developing, and I could be writing still needs some support. Or a common one I put last year, I would encourage the use of a picture. So for a lot of students, having a picture was really helpful for them, and I can simply type that in. And then I work my way across for all the students. So that comes at different points. I've recorded it on my paper, and then I'm adding it here. Maybe the next student, I don't have any information. So evidence missing, I added that to let the students know, I really don't know how you're doing. I haven't seen you do that. And I'm fairly upfront with them so that they know that. So that can be done for all the students. And Phil, this is where I'm interested in what you've done, because we've tried to take different parts of the course, and we've, like, this is obviously squares, cubes, and their roots. And we've tried to incorporate competencies within our expectations. And what I'm wondering is there a way to have the competencies here and what we're looking for to help students get better at competencies? So that's a question I have. Another question I have is, if we took this student here that was developing proficient, extending, evidence missing, and I don't know, proficient here, do we actually need something here that says where they are overall? Do we leave it blank? And how do we promote a growth mindset? So we've toyed with ideas like, in this expectation, having overall, where are you overall in terms of this outcome? What is your progress? Here's where you are now. We've toyed with a lot of things and putting comments in here and putting an overall. Obviously, when we get to the point that this outcome is going to be on the report card, we need to make some decisions about where this student is, if we have this, and how do we communicate that back to students? That's one we haven't totally resolved, and I'm quite interested in what the group may think of that. So that's the master sheet that can be created, and then you just fill it out. It kind of works pretty good. I've also included a summary sheet here, because if I notice that one of these expectations, I have a lot of people developing in that expectation, that's a focus area for me. Or if I notice a lot of kids are extending in that, that may be something to focus on as well. So that summary sheet is really just designed for me to get a high level overview of how everyone's doing. As you change it on the main sheet, it changes in here. So that's why I have 803 math summary and so on. The second part of that is, within each of these math 803, I have created one of these for every single student. So I'm just going to open up, I think this was the first one. I was playing around with the names the other day. Let's see if this pops up. Okay, so for Amelia, I would share Amelia's sheet with Amelia. She would have this, it's located on the web. When you go to share, the one trick is, when you go to share, you do need to make sure that if I go to share it with somebody, I need to make sure that they're a viewer. Because if you make them an editor, guess what? They're extending in absolute. So you do want to make sure that they're a viewer there, and they can actually see how they're making out, okay? And this will show everything for the entire year. So we've put everything for grade 8 in here. Again, we're looking to change a few of these because I don't think they're perfect. They're just where our starting point. And some of those came from the old achievement indicators, which I'm fairly familiar with. So the process there is really, I would just change this to Amelia's name. And then when I go into my files, I can see Amelia is going to show up here as that spreadsheet with her name on it. Okay. There is a key part if you are actually setting this up for yourself, which I've explained in the video. I hope it's clear. Everything runs off the idea of an import range. If you're not sure of an import range function, there's two parts. One is it needs to have where it's coming from, the sheet. Second thing it needs to have is the actual name of the sheet and the cells that it's coming from. So if we look at this learning standard, it's pulling that learning standard from my master sheet, and it's just pulling this whole column. So if you create a copy of it, what you need to do is make sure that you change it to whatever the name of, whatever the URL is of your sheet. Simply that easy. And then if you want to change the name of your class, like you don't have an 803 math, you want to change it to math 7, change the name to math 7, and then you can change it within. I thought this was going to be a massive pain to change it. However, if you do a quick find and replace, we can actually take this sheet and we can go into Amelia and we can just go, you'll notice this is the wrong URL. I can just go edit, find and replace, and I simply replace with the new URL. So I take this new URL that ends in a 6, take my old URL that's here, whoops, and I always put these on a separate page. But in this time, and I should have. Sorry, this is hard to see because I've got my screen all blown up. I'm going to make it just smaller for a sec. Take this URL, copy it, and then I'll make it bigger so you can see again. And then just change, make sure you include also search within formulas. And if you click a replace all, it will replace it everywhere in all of these sheets. You're done. It's really easy. Okay. Replace all. And it will replace it and it will reload and it'll tell you there's 10 incidences and all that. So again, you need to make sure that the URL is correct and whatever sheet you're going off is correct. Okay. And it will kind of pull them in. Does that kind of, hopefully that makes sense to everybody. The big idea though, out of all this is I want Amelia to see how she's doing here. But I want an easy way to actually tell Amelia how she's doing so that she can see that. So my easiest way I found so far is to type it into the master sheet. As I collect evidence, I add it. If Amelia's gone from developing and she's now proficient, I'll change it and it will go back to Amelia's sheet and it will change on Amelia's sheet on the fly. So as we change things, that happens. So she always has access to it. So again, to make it easy for people, what I've tried to do is I've put in here a master assessment sheet. You'd make a copy of this, you'd put it in your folder. You'd take all of these, highlight them all, make a copy, drag them into your folder. They're all linked. Change the URL, change the name of the sheet, and you're good to go. And that's kind of what I set it up. But again, the big idea is that Amelia knows how she is doing. What you want to put in here, like what your learning standards are for math 12 or science 12 or whatever the subject, if you change them in this master sheet, if I change this to solve effectively really well, it automatically changes into the summary sheet and it automatically changes for Amelia. So everything is designed to link through. So if we change the order we do things, like let's say we're not doing cubes and roots next, we could pull up another section and put it in. Now, the advantage for us as a staff is we've had to decide what these expectations are. This part is the tricky part. Like, what do you really expect and what is extending in here? That part gets really tricky and it does take some professional dialogue to work that out within the context of the curriculum, because are you going to have competencies here? Are you going to have content here? Are you going to have a little bit of both? Now, the one thing that the Thinking Classroom book has that Peter has is, you know, what actually goes in here that we want students to know what they can do. As we started to work this out for our first unit, this is not the same as what we actually have within our master assessment sheet, because we are actually changing it as we go, because we've redefined what we want students to be able to do. And we're kind of changing back and forth, if that makes sense. So it's a little bit dynamic and a little bit negotiation between the different grade 8 teachers, but it's really good professional development for us to think, what is it we want them to do? Is there an extending category for something? And some things I don't think have an extending category. Like if we look here in the check your understanding part, we'll include this, determine the square of a number. You either do that or you don't. You're proficient or you're not. So we're not going to have an extending category probably for that, which is okay. And I think what we're going to end up doing is putting a little asterisk to say, you know, proficient is the highest level with this. Again, that's in the fly. We have questions. I'd love to hear what people think. But that's sort of what we have set up for you. If anyone wants to use it, if it's useful, if it's not, don't worry about it. But if you do click on this Loom, it does have how to set it all up from beginning to end in as choppy a way as I can possibly explain how to do it. But hopefully that's helpful. Okay. That's kind of all I had for people. I'm happy to take questions, or Peter, if you want to send people to breakout rooms or whatever works best. I'll put the URL for this folder here that's there, and then the PowerPoint that I did today is here as well. But I'll add that to the chat when I figure it out.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Can you take the share screen off?
I can.
I'm sure that people are going to have lots to talk about and have lots of questions. Everything from like, and keep in mind that Richard gave a presentation about the big ideas and the philosophy behind it. And he also gave some really practical mechanics about it. And feel free to talk with your groups and about either of those or both of those. But we're going to send you off for 15 minutes into small groups to discuss what you heard from Richard. And let's see, I'll make the groups. That should do it. So accept the invitation. I'll pause. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you had good discussions about what Richard had to share. I got to visit a few groups, and I have to tell you that Alfred offered this word that I just think is such a nice encapsulation of what it is, the journey that Richard's on, and it was empowerment, and how this is going to empower students to take part in their learning. So on that note, let's open it up. Anybody have questions for Richard? Or for the room in general? But what are your questions? Things you want clarifications on?
I can jump in. So we talked about communicating, and obviously communicating, you know, student progress to the student. Obviously depends on the age. You know, communicating it to a grade 2 or 3 student is different than a grade 6 is different than when you get through high school. But there's another aspect of communication / reporting that I think also varies by age, which is to the parents. And so I think maybe the next iteration of this is, you know, what do report cards look like? How do we at a grade 3 level report back? You know, many, all parents don't understand what we mean by proficient and developing and extending, especially if we don't necessarily understand it, never mind the different standards and things like that. So I think there's a whole bunch of work probably still to be done around the communication piece. I know as a parent of a grade 6 child who has gone through fresh grade and just had pictures thrown at me, and I'm like, well, where are they at? Are they in the right spot or not? And then, you know, when he progresses further, it'll be, okay, he got 29 out of 30 on a quiz. Okay, what does that mean? You know, I'm anticipating all of these things coming along, and I'm just wondering how we go about, if we even have any power to how we go about changing some of those things. Because I think that's the next big tackle.
I think that maybe Richard has some answers, but I will just share something with you that in my journeys, when I talk to teachers, and it doesn't matter which province I'm in, because every province has some version of the proficiency standards. And if there's a group of teachers in the room and I ask them what extending means, if the number of teachers in the room is greater than 1, there is no consensus. Anybody have any thoughts to this? Like Phil's asked a really good question. Like, Richard,
Phil, I can speak.
I have a thought. I don't know if you guys can hear me. I don't have my headset. Is my voice
we're hearing
okay?
you, Rob.
Okay. Hey everyone. Yeah, I think, I think that I struggle with that too, because I've just kind of in my own mind set, okay, what does, pragmatically, what are the different categories, so I can go through and mark and, assess these students. But then, yeah, how do I then turn around and communicate that to my students? And, further, how do I communicate that to other members of the department so we're on the same page? And then, yeah, how do you communicate that to parents so they're in the loop? And I think it's the same with marks. Like, what is an A? What is a 79%? Like, what does that mean? It's just because that's the existing system, it doesn't get questioned as much. But when you're introducing this change now, because they don't understand it, they don't just accept it because it's the way it's always been, it's going to get challenged more. So I don't have an answer, but that is definitely on my mind as well, is that challenge and smoothing out and making sure parents are informed and know what's happening. Ultimately, hopefully it generates more conversations. And I think that's where assessment can guide the learning and the instruction. So I think ultimately it'll be a net benefit, but yeah, how do you communicate that to other stakeholders?
Richard, you were going to add to this?
Yeah, when I first started teaching here, I sent out a weekly email to all the parents, which was long and laborious. And to be honest, I don't know that all the parents really read it, but it got to a lot of these ideas along the way. With the pandemic and not being able to see parents, I changed that a little bit, and I call them one-take productions. I take about a 3 to 4 minute video of, it's kind of a bit of a talking head. Sometimes it shows stuff around the classroom, but it's actually a video out to the parents to kind of explain what we're doing, what we're aiming for, and then letting the parents know that the students have these spreadsheets that they don't have access to, but they should sit down with the student and talk to them about how they're doing. Having a 20-year-old son now, but wasn't that long ago, he was in grade 8. He did nothing for a full year. He learned nothing, and everything was nothing. So there was no inroad for a parent to actually have a discussion. So I'm finding with these little 3-minute snippet videos, sometimes they're a little bit longer. They come out usually once every couple of weeks. The parents at least know what's going on to have the conversation and look at how they're doing. So Phil, I find that a little bit helpful in that they can talk about what they're doing. And in the video, I can also say, these are some of the things I'm really looking for kids to be able to do and how you can help at home. Quite helpful at grade 8 because the content is usually stuff that a lot of adults are okay with, like ratios, and most people have a concept around that. A little bit harder when you're doing things like factoring quadratics. It's really kind of useless in the real world for most parents. So, but anyway, I don't know if that helps at all, but I've found that helpful for me.
And I think one of the things that we have to remember too is that communication between teacher and parent traditionally has been really important because there's been very little communication between teacher and student, right? So that the parent needed to know what was going on because the student was not a good conduit for that information. But what we're finding in these situations sometimes is if a student can explain to their parent where they are in their learning and where they have to work, that's a really powerful conversation. Any other questions or comments for Richard or anybody? Go ahead, Melissa.
I just want to say it's amazing how your spreadsheets are linked. Maybe lots of people can do that, but I spend so much time copying and pasting. But I have a question that's related. So if everything's linked, I guess students have a sense of how things are being updated as you put things in all the time. Okay.
Yes, as much as I can. I'll be honest, sometimes I'm a week behind. I think as long as you're honest with kids and kids know you care, it works out, right? So telling students that, you know what, I'm 3 days behind because we had basketball practice last night and this other thing, but I'll get there. Here's where I know you are right now, and that will be reflected on it is, I think that's the best you can do. Where I find it most powerful is when it comes time to write the reports. I have little comments and snippets I can pull out that, Johnny went from couldn't even read the problem to understand it. Now Johnny's willing to take risks and he understands what's going on in the problem. And he's trying different strategies. Or when we're working at the boards, he went from not wanting to do anything to suddenly he or she's standing up there and doing it. So I find that part is really the benefit for me. So I put in time now, but when it comes time to write report cards, and our report cards are fairly extensive, it really does help me get those report cards and feel a lot more confident about what I have. And then because it updates after, when the unit's done, like ratio is not going to disappear for that student. I want them to be numerate and know that later on. If 3 months after we're done working on ratio, that student finally gets ratio, I will change it then as well. And I'll add that comment on the report card for the end of the year. So it allows students to always go back and see what they could focus on and get better at. Hopefully that
Thanks.
helps.
Yeah.
So they stop asking, what can I do for extra marks? And they start asking, where can I still provide more evidence? Anybody else? Yeah, Yuri.
I just had a quick question about assessment here. I'm not sure how everyone is evaluating students for extending on a particular topic. At my school, we kind of have, for the traditional tests, this section for like level 7, 8 being extending, where students kind of solve these unfamiliar, a little bit more challenging kind of problems that you might see on a Waterloo math contest or something from Brilliant. Is it possible to maybe discuss how teachers are evaluating students for an extending understanding of a concept, or if teachers would be interested in sharing questions that they're using for extending understanding of a concept?
I think in Vancouver, I've been part of the some working groups for the assessment, and so just within our group, it doesn't mean it's not a district policy per se. Maybe we just come up with some general guidelines, but I think we pretty much settled on extending mean it's still within grade level. So not like doesn't necessarily have to be super difficult. It could be, but definitely we agree it needs to be grade level. And so I think the word extending is a bit. I think our group would agree that the word extending was a bit misleading. But I always just think like I'm not so sure the words are ever, to be honest, super important. It's like there's 4 levels, and you can give whatever words you want to them. But that's just like my general kind of background thought on it. But we do, the working group at least thought definitely just grade level for sure.
I am at the very beginning of my journey. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, sorry. Child care stuff. I'm at the very beginning of my journey, but total beginner here. I'm not on a working group. But for me, the way I'm treating extending is to go. I'd say the way I see proficient is what they need to, like, if proficient in math 9 to me on algebra, if it's a content based, is are they ready to move into math 10? Like, could I move that student into math 10 and they would have learned everything they need in math 9 to be good? Like, that is what proficient, you got this. Okay, so what I'm using for extending is kind of, can you move beyond that? Same topic as the grade 9. So in grade level, as in it's in grade 9 math, that topic. But to me, there has to be something more about it. Like, they've just blown away the question. Like, the way they answered is just like, or the question itself maybe is novel, right? It's that content, but it kind of connects with earlier content somehow. Yeah, so I haven't quite figured out extending either, but I am leaning towards something that makes that topic, that question particularly challenging. And I'm thinking of making them kind of optional opportunities that students can try out to provide evidence. But if they really don't do well on that question, it doesn't count against them. It's just that I haven't collected evidence to see that extending category.
What I've been thinking about is extending is that you have to go beyond what I teach in class. So if you get everything that I throw at you in class, that's proficiency. And then if you get sparked up by some kind of topic, I was teaching the rule of 72 in a math class, and some girl was interested, well, why is it 72? And so she went off on her own and did some research and was playing with numbers, and shows me this piece of paper where she had figured stuff out. That's what I call extending, right? It's beyond where I'm taking everyone. And so I try and give the opportunity as often as I can and encourage kids to take this idea a bit further on their own outside of what I've covered.
Roz, thanks, Bruce. Roz?
Hi, thanks. I just wanted to echo what Doug said. I mean, I'm in the same district, so maybe we're just hearing the same things. But I definitely, when I've been meeting with my district resource teacher, it is really important that when we look at extending, it's within grade level. Because I think there's sometimes a tendency to look for above grade level. But my read and my understanding is that it does have to be within grade level. And I'm definitely still in very much the learning stages, but I think about extending in the same way that Richard said, and that is the higher level bloom. So are they able to connect one topic to another? Are they able to actually communicate their thinking really succinctly? I mean, I talk about how mathematicians, you might call them lazy, you might call them efficient, but can you make it as short and sweet as possible? Because really, you know, lots of people can get the idea, but it's really roundabout, but can you actually convey all the information as little information as you can? And so it's sort of being able to tighten everything up, but still within grade level and being creative, of course. But it was helpful for me to hear multiple times, because we usually need to hear things multiple times, that extending by the ministry is still within grade level. Yeah, that's my 2 bits.
Thanks, Roz. And before I call on Phil and then Jess, one of the things I want to draw attention to what Roz said there is if you coded what she was talking about, she was actually talking about a merging of competency with content. And I've heard other teachers talk about the same thing, that extending is proficient plus some sort of demonstration of competency around that. Go ahead, Phil.
I'll talk and put it in the chat at the same time, in case you want to read it. Yeah, I agree, Roz, and others who've talked about it being at grade level. I do like the idea of synthesis. I'm not 100% sure that higher level blooms always fits. There's some more complexity to blooms than people, unless you've really studied blooms, know about blooms. Anyway, I think there can be some low blooms tasks that are actually extensions, for instance. Anyway, I think if we start thinking about, and I think this is the reason that the province say not beyond the course, is it's not equitable for some of our students who can get a tutor and work beyond a course. They, you know, if that's the only way they can get extending in your class, then you know, maybe they walk into your class with extending as well. So we talk about extension needs to be something that is on every single assessment. There has to be some sort of opportunity to extend, and that it's appropriate to where you're at that time, that it has to be able to be done in a reasonable amount of time, and that Yeah, we actually gathered everybody together, all the department heads in my school together, just to talk about extension and extend, like, what is the definition? Because if we as leaders in our department didn't understand, in our school didn't understand it, there's no way our teachers understood it, which means there's no way that the kids and parents and other constituents are going to understand it. So we started with our academic team or department heads actually this year, and just dove right into what is it, what isn't it, came up with a succinct definition and took that back so everybody was on the same page. Because we were finding after 3 or 4 years, people were starting to branch out on what the definition was, and it just wasn't helpful for students.
Nice. Thanks, Phil. Jess, go ahead. I see you, Chris.
Yeah, so I agree with most of what everybody's been saying, but one of the things that I'm really trying to eliminate from my vocabulary, particularly at elementary, but I think it applies at high school too, is this idea of grade level. Like, they're in grade 3, so that's their grade level, right? They can't be beyond the grade level because they're in grade 3. So that's the range of kids that are in grade 3. So instead of looking at like grade level, if I'm looking at extending, then I'm looking for not them going beyond grade level. In fact, I actively discourage teachers and parents from giving kids work that is from the next grade or 3 grades beyond, because I feel like that is something that we do if we're looking at education, like I'm just preparing the kids to try and make it to grade 10 or whatever. They're just trying to get into the next grade. But for me, that's not what school is about. And so their grade level is whatever grade they're in. And they're always at grade level because they're always going to go on to the next grade in elementary. Like, we don't hold kids back. And so when I'm looking at extending, of course, that's at grade level. And because extending's at every grade. And so I'm looking for some of the words that people have said, like things like creativity or elegance or efficiency, as well as complexity of what they're doing. Yeah, so I feel like often, like when we focus on like above grade level, below grade level, at grade level, I think that complicates the conversation because it brings people back to that sort of idea that, because this is different, right? Standards-based assessment is different than the other kind of assessment that we used to do, right? Or that a lot of people still do. And so I feel like when we're talking about grade level, it drags it back to that kind of assessment of just sort of moving kids through the grades. I don't know if that makes sense, but
it does make sense. You're adding this idea that we're not just giving them extending because they have more knowledge. Knowledge is just stuff that kids collect along their journey, and some parents will ensure that they collect more than others and so on. That's not what extending is. It's what they do with that knowledge within that context. Chris, go ahead.
Okay, first of all, maybe just to Peter kicked off this extending conversation by talking about having different opinions within whenever trying to get it.
It's like being in a video store in 19.
Exactly, I said the same thing. In terms of you get 6 educators together and they'll have 7 different opinions over what extending means.
Yeah.
But yet here in this room, so far anyway, there's been kind of unanimous agreement that it does not mean extending. So this is more of a rhetorical thing. This is not what I plan to talk about. But just so how is it then that this message is so persistent out there that extending has somehow means that, to be extending in grade 3, you have to show me grade 5 math, for example, or what have you. Anyway, my real question though was more around, Peter, your synthesis of Roz's idea. And maybe if you could clarify that a little bit for me, just because Yeah, I completely agree. At the extending level, we often do see this merging of the competencies and the content. However, my one fear there, because I have seen this with the teachers that I meet with, is that sometimes I have seen the competency work reserved for at that extending level. And it's a bunch of very procedural things. And if you can do this, then I'll give you something where you can communicate or visualize or what have you. So it's my one kind of caveat, I guess, with that. What I heard from Roz instead was, when she talked about the communication there, she was talking about elegance and efficiency and so on. So there's still opportunities for communication all the way through, beginning at the emerging, developing through proficient and extending, but that we are looking for, just as we're looking for depth of knowledge of content, we're looking for, I don't know if depth is the right word here, but sophistication in terms of that competency as well. There, it's kind of my one.
So
in there. Would you agree or push back, or?
No, I'm not going to push back at all. I'm just saying that this is not my opinion. I'm saying in my journeys, I've encountered teachers who look at extending as knowledge crossing with some competencies. And I would say that maybe some of those teachers are reserving competencies for extending, but I think that what they're trying to do is run knowledge through some sort of a filter that says knowledge is necessary but not sufficient. And we need something else. And Roz talked about elegance, and others talked about creativity, and others talked about connection and communication and so on. So there was some sort of take the knowledge but do something with it. And then we have extending. And you know, I think what the bottom line is here is that the words matter. And that doesn't mean we have the right words here. Andrew, go ahead.
Yeah. Thanks, Peter.
Hi, so my question is about the whole no surprise aspect of this assessment. And I work with a lot of students that struggle in math. And I think if I were to give them an assessment and put it in this Excel spreadsheet or a Google spreadsheet and give them a lot of comments of developing, missing evidence, lacking evidence. And then my comments were something like, you can't do function arithmetic because you don't know function notation. And you also don't know what 3 minus 9 is. You're in really deep trouble for your quiz tomorrow. I'm wondering if, when I tell students like this, they are often very surprised at my take on their skill level. Like they're very, very, very surprised. And some of them, I'm wondering if they saw a huge list of developing when I do a diagnostic, do you think that they might be more informed, but would they also be demoralized? And I'm wondering if you guys have any experiences with this when you have to give a lot of, you know, unfortunate news to a student.
I'm happy to comment on my experience. In terms of using the sheet, I don't always put a developing, emerging, proficient, or whatever in there. Sometimes it's just a comment, right? Like we may actually be working on something in class and I've noticed something about a student. For example, some of the students today couldn't use a meter stick. Like that's something that I believe they need to know how to do for life. So I'm going to put a comment in there. Is it going to mean that I give them a developing on something? And is it even related to the outcome? It's not, to be honest, but I think they also need to know. So then I think them having an idea of where the issues are early is better than them finding out after the barn door is closed. So the sooner that they can know that, the better, in my opinion. And I think you have to be careful how you couch it. Like most students have something they know that they can build on to go further ahead. So those comments can also be, what parts do they know that they need to build on? And that's how I've tried to frame it. So I haven't had any negative reactions to anything yet, to be perfectly honest. I can't say that I've ever had a student though that didn't know anything. And I've had a number of IEP students and students with other issues. And I've often suggested ways for them to better understand it within those comments as well, which can be very helpful. So because my wife is also the learning resource person here, and we work together through an RTI model where she's in the classroom, she also has access to the spreadsheets, and she can add stuff for the students as well. I mean, it takes a whole village. So as those things get added, it's good. It's good information for the student. It's good for me to know because she sees things that I don't know. So we really haven't, to be honest, Andrew, had anything super negative. Some kids are concerned that they don't know parts of it, but we're not doing so much of it at once that it's like, boom, you don't know anything. But it's usually within a section, and then they're willing to work on that section. And most kids actually do fairly well before we move on, because now they know what they don't know, and we can break it down even into smaller steps with them.
And are you able to motivate them to study prerequisite knowledge, such as function notation before function arithmetic?
Oh, I tell all the students they have a right to fail if they want. So
I just want to jump in here on that. I think what Andrew's question and Richard's answer highlights is a tension between paradigms. And we have to understand that a shift in practice, like Richard's talking about, isn't just about the spreadsheet. It's a real shift from this sort of discrete assessment, which is what we grew up on in the 1900s and the beginning of the 21st century, versus this continuous assessment, which Richard is talking about, where information is flowing continuously. And when we merge those without shifting from discrete to continuous, you get exactly what you're talking about, Andrew, which is this truth bomb just dropping on these kids the day before the test. And it's overwhelming. But when we think about it as continuous and information trickling through constantly, and when there's little amounts of content being covered and that information's coming as Richard's doing, it's a trickle rather than a full truth bomb dropping on them.
Yeah, and sometimes it doesn't come through the spreadsheet either. It comes from, I know that a certain student needs to work on something. I mean, you mentioned function notation. So I'll talk to the student within class about what they need to do with function notation. And it'll be noted within the spreadsheet at some point. And they may have actually worked it out before I get a chance to write it out, but I've talked to them about it. So it's about having that dialogue back and forth, I think. So Peter, I agree with Peter. It's got to be pretty continuous.
Yeah. I'm going to wrap this up now because we're at the time, but we can keep the line open for a while. Roz, your point is really good. It's well taken there. You know, we just finished reading Francis Su's book, and he has his line in there that grading is a measure of progress, not a measure of potential. And I think this feeds back into Richard's comment about, I'm not sure if we need to have something in this box and what to label it if there's and that's that growth mindset piece, which often gets shut down when we start to aggregate marks too soon and students start to see that as a measure of their potential rather than a measure of their progress. I want to thank everyone for coming. I really want to thank Richard, and I want to thank all the people who shared ideas at the beginning and shared questions at the end. And I just want to say thanks. And I love that the conversation continues, because this is how we all get better and how we impact so many thousands of students across this province.